Hello, everyone. This is NP Clem back with a podcast. It's been a while since I've done one. Today we're going to be talking about the ACC. It's middle of season for the ACC. Every single team has played 6 games so far, so it's really easy to compare teams and stats and whatnot. So I thought it was a good time to go ahead and do this. Quick, before we get started, I need to go over our sponsorship for today. I am somewhat happy to be sponsored by New Belgium Voodoo Ranger IPA. It's a solid beer. It's definitely not something that I would buy often, but every once in a while it'd be good. And if I went to a friend's house or somebody's house and it was all they had, I'd drink it, no problem. But again, I don't think I would go out of my way to drink it. So let's get into it. So kind of go over the format a little bit. At first, I'm going to go over the current standings and maybe talk a little bit about the surprises or disappointments of the season. And then I'm going to go on a team-by-team basis, go over the first half of the season, go over a couple key players, some positives and negatives that we can take away from the performance so far, and maybe what we can look forward to in the second half of the season, and then predict their wins and losses through the rest of the season. So I'll do that for every team. I'd like to try and spend between 3 and 5 minutes on each team, just so every coach can get kind of as part of the podcast. And then at the end, I will do my final standings that I projected and go through the conference championship game and playoffs and what kind of, what we could be looking at bowl season for the ACC. Okay, so get started. We're going to go into the current standings. So we're going to start with the Atlantic. In first place, surprisingly, is Louisville. They are 2-0 in the conference, 5-1 overall. Absolute probably the surprise of the season so far for the ACC. I don't know if many people saw that coming. I know I certainly didn't. I thought this team would probably struggle to get to 5 or 6 wins total on the season. And here we are halfway through the season. They're already at 5. So that's a huge surprise. I think Coach Borletariat is definitely in the running for Coach of the Year right now. He has really gotten that team working. And I'll talk more about them later, but even with how they're winning, it's kind of surprising. And then second in the Atlantic is the number 20 Clemson Tigers. They are 2-1 in the conference, 4-2 overall. They've had kind of a mixed schedule and kind of dropped a couple of games. That's not surprising, but not what we're used to with Coach Emperor and Clemson. In third place is Syracuse, who somehow just year after year just hangs in there. They're so inconsistent with coaching and stability, but they just hang in there. They're 2-1 on the season, and they're 3-3 overall, so they're in position right now to make a bowl game for sure. Next, so fourth in the Atlantic, Wake Forest. That's a bit surprised that they're fourth in the conference. Now they're only 1-1 in their division, in the conference so far. They're fourth in their division. They're 2-4 overall. It's not going to get much better for them, but I think Coach Kendrick, especially with redshirting all the players that he did, can look at the first half of the season and say there are reasons to be happy about what happened. Then fifth in the Atlantic is Boston College, who are 1-1 and 1-5 overall, and I'll get to them very shortly. And then sixth, so definitely not last in the division, is North Carolina State at 0-2 in the conference and 1-5 overall. Been a real struggle for them, especially after last year when they were the surprise team, I think, in the conference, going 6-6 and getting that bowl game. They've kind of come back down to earth a little bit and struggled for sure. Then in last place in the Atlantic Division and the worst conference record in the ACC so far, the Florida State Seminoles at 0-3 in the conference and 2-4 overall. I can't comprehend that Florida State has the worst conference record through 6 games in the conference. That's insane to me. So we'll deep dive into them a little bit later. So move to the Coastal. We're on top of the conference division, I should say, is the number 6 Virginia Cavaliers, almost the number 1. Not quite number 1 yet, but we'll get there. They're 3-0 in the conference, 6-0 overall. Really good season, best start in school history. We'll get to all these games later, but I'll probably say that after every school that we'll get to them later. in the Coastal is the North Carolina Tar Heels at 2-1 in the conference, 4-2 overall. Another surprise team. They've got Max Laws actually playing well, being a good quarterback. It's insane. And then we get number 14 Pittsburgh Panthers at 1-1 in the conference, 5-1 overall. They've had a great season. We'll talk about them again later. And then talk about great season. We get Duke next at 1-1 and 5-1 overall. By 1-1 conference, 5-1 overall. I think this is Duke's year to finally get that bowl game. I think they're 100% going to get a bowl game. That's insane. That's not insane, but it's a testament to Coach Darman's hard work and effort. So he definitely should be in the running for Coach of the Year, in my opinion. And then next, we got Virginia Tech at 1-1 over in the conference and 3-3 overall. A bit up and down season. They can't seem to put wins together consistently. And we'll see if they can do that in the second half of the season. And then we've got the Miami Hurricanes, who have been one of the worst teams in the country, but have won a conference game. They're 1-2 in the ACC, 1-5 overall. And then the lowly Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, again 1-2 in the conference, 2-4 overall. Huge news coming out recently. Coach Dre, who has been there since 2013, May 2013, he joined the team. He's been the coach for a long time. He's been a huge presence on that campus. Deciding to step down and step away from the program. I know it can't have been an easy decision. You put all your hard work and effort into it, and then just saying that, I can't do it anymore. I just have to step away. It's not an easy decision. So I sympathetic with Coach Trey. New coach Adi Kandu, I think that's how you pronounce it, just started over. This is his first game this weekend, so we'll see how he does. But huge loss to the conference prestige and nobility, and Coach Trey leaving. So that's the standings right now. So we'll get into the team by team. So we'll go alphabetically. So we're going to go Boston College first and then through the rest of the conference alphabetically. So as we said over at the top, Boston College is 1-5. They started off 0-5, and then they just beat the Florida State Seminoles, who are having a real struggle of a season. So let's look at Boston College's schedule so far. At Iowa, at home against Army, at Mississippi State, at Notre Dame, at Louisville. Now, typically in a normal year, I would say the Army and Louisville games are for sure wins for a team like Boston College, but Boston College has been on a down year. Army's on an upswing, so is Louisville, so that's 2 losses that they have. The Florida State win is huge just because it keeps the hopes alive. If they go 5-1 over the last 6 games, they can get a bowl game. Now I'll talk a couple minutes about how I think the second half is going to go, but that win against Florida State kind of gets them into the midseason break almost, if you can count it that, and say, hey, let's gather ourselves. We're here. We've got that win. Let's go on a streak. Let's do what we can to get that bowl game. So that's not I can't overlook that win enough. But yeah, Iowa, they're just going to be consistently their tough team. Mississippi State, Coach Duncan's probably one of the most underrated coaches in the country. He is very good. Notre Dame, Joe G is doing really good things with them this year. They've had a couple bad games, but the rest of the season they've been very good. Louisville, Coach Berletariat is just got that team just running right. He just knows that vein of that team so well, and just has them just working. So they've had a really tough schedule, probably second toughest in the conference behind Pittsburgh. So it'd be forgivable if they had a couple losses, but to have 5 at this point for a team like Boston College, it's a real disappointment. So we'll see how they rebound the rest of the season. So let's look into some key players that they have. Some key guys that are playing well and need to play well for them to put together some wins and try and turn the season around. First guy is Zahir Watts, their running back. He's really the only thing on offense that's really working consistently. He's come a bit of a power workhorse. He's really having to put the bulk of the offensive game plan on his back. We'll see how he keeps it up for the second half of the season, but he's done very well so far. And then, Andrew Boyd, cornerback, was hyped very early on, had a couple really good seasons, and then the last season and a half has just kind of disappeared off the radar. He doesn't have great stats this year, nothing spectacular, but he really needs to help lead that defense. He's a senior, he's been around forever. He needs to lead that defense, and from the back end there or from the sides where he's at, be that presence on the field that just calms. And sometimes, this defense can kind of get overwhelmed. He has to be the person to step up and say, let's cool it down, let's slow it down, let's just get back to what we do best. And I think so far he hasn't done a great job of doing that. So second half of the season, he needs to kind of step up his leadership responsibilities on the defense there. And then there's defensive end Michael Britt, who's having a very good season. He's getting after the quarterback. He's getting stops in the running game. So he just needs to continue playing like his game, and he'll keep making an impact and helping this defense out. So a couple of positives I'd like to take away from the season so far, and maybe even looking forward, is running game was working really well. Again, like Zahir Watts is just doing very well. He's probably the second best running back in the conference, behind Deshaun Dockery, who's having just a fantastic year. Otherwise, there's really not much I can take out of the first half of the season besides the running game. Everything else really isn't really gelling together. But looking forward, their schedule gets easier. It's not 100% easy, but it gets easier. They have more home games. They play teams like Wake Forest, North Carolina State. Even if Syracuse is having a good season, it's still Syracuse. Boston College should still be able to beat that team. So they've got some positives to look forward to and look at their schedule and say, hey, there are some wins there. And if we can get some momentum going into the last, 2 or 3 games there, we might be able to get to that 6 or 7 win mark on the season. Negatives, definitely a tough schedule in the first half has helped put them in the position they're in. Ever since LaShore left last year, I think last 2 years that guy come in who was okay. He was solid. He wasn't great, but he was solid. He did something for him. However, Dante Pickett this year just isn't getting it done. He's just not consistently putting up good games or really have any really good games that I can point to. There just seems to be like a lack of chemistry between him and the wide receiver crew. And they have a pretty good core of wide receivers still, and they're just not finding them. They're just not connecting well. And again, defense, sometimes in big moments, they just don't step up. They just don't get to that plate and say, hey, it's on us. Buck stops here. Let's end this run, or let's get a turnover, or let's get the stop on huge third down. They just can't do that consistently. And it comes back to Andrew Boyd being that calming presence, being that veteran senior presence back there saying, guys, let's get this done. So some of the negatives I would take away. So looking the rest of the season, I think I'll just go through each game and say win or loss. Don't need to go too much into that. NC State at home, I think they'll win that game. On the road at Syracuse, that'll be one of their toughest games that they'll win. They'll win that game. They'll beat Wake Forest at home. They travel to Virginia. I think that's a loss. And have Virginia Tech, and I think they do lose that game too. And then last game of the season, they go to Clemson. At that point, the season's over. They're just trying to do everything they can to play spoiler in Clemson's, Atlantic hopes. But I think they'll lose. They'll go 3-3 over the final stretch and go 4-8 on the season. And this might be the first Boston College team since maybe 2013 to not get a bowl game. And even then, I think they did have a bowl game in 2013. So this would be the worst season in school history. So there's a lot to not like about this team. And Smoking Cricket has struggled, but I think we see what he does with the Rams. If he can put together his team the way he wants his team to be, I think 2 to 3 seasons there will be back on top of the world. So I don't think it's the end of the world for Boston College. It's just one bad season. So moving on to Clemson. They've had kind of a tough schedule too. They beat TCU at home, start the year. They went to Auburn. Auburn's one of the top 2 teams in the country. I don't think there's any doubt about that. They lost that game. They had a good stretch. They beat Georgia Tech and UNLV at home. They went on the road to Syracuse, won that game. And at that point, Syracuse was on top of the Atlantic Division. So, that win at Syracuse there puts put Clemson in the top of the conference division. But the next week they went to excuse me, to Louisville and ended up losing that game. So they're 4-2 on the season. The 2 games they've lost, Auburn game, I think everyone necessarily see it coming, but wasn't really surprised. I think the Louisville loss was the most surprising one. So I think they're going to rebound well. Coach Emperor is too good of a coach, and there's still too good of a core on this team for them to not contend for the division title. So the key players are, first one I would say is Jamel Armstrong, the quarterback. He has not played well. He just not consistently finding his team. He's throwing too many interceptions. He's not throwing enough touchdowns. His completion percentage, I think, is under 60%. And for I think it's a third-year starter or at least 2-year starter, that's just not going to cut it. Part of that is the disappearance of Josiah McCray at times. He just does not. Last year he had a fantastic year, and then this year he's just not with it. There's just a lack of, almost like they just over the offseason just didn't connect well. There's like a loss of connection there. Corey Bolden, the second wide receiver, number 2 in the depth chart, is having a great year. I think he's outperformed Josiah McCray at this point, which have your number 2 wide receiver outplay your number 1 wide receiver is usually not a good sign. But then I would say on defense, Glenn Thorpe's a defensive end, the freshman defensive end. I think at this point would have my vote for defensive freshman of the year. He's just very good. He's just getting after the quarterback like no other. He just does not stop. And then you still have free safety Marquise Holiday, last year's defensive player of the year. So Clemson might have back-to-back defensive freshman of the year. So, the defense is still good. The defense is still there. They're not going to lose because of their defense. They're going to lose because of their offense. The positives I would look at, the secondary. Secondary is still elite. They lost Marquise Reed, but they're still an elite secondary, probably top 5 in the country. And again, I mentioned it before, Corey Bolden, the wide receiver number 2, I think he's a 3.5 out of 3.5, having a great year. Really, the only seems to be Jamel's starting to become Jamel's number 1 target right now. I don't know if that's going to continue, but so far he's had a very good first half. So negatives, I think Timmy Mark could be better used, and I don't know is necessarily how to do that, how I would do that if I was Clemson, but I think I would maybe try and find a better way to use him in the running game, or to maybe have him start going outside, or maybe go inside, maybe just switch up where he's rushing the ball. Because I think Timmy Mark is a solid running back who's not going to get you a ton of yards. He's not going to get you a great YPC, but he's going to get you touchdowns. He's going to score in the red zone. And I think they haven't done a good enough job of utilizing him. And then, of course, my other big negative is Armstrong just is not efficient enough. He's just not completing his passes at a high enough percentage. He's throwing too many interceptions. He's just not playing good enough. However, I still think Clemson is a very good team. I still think they're a top 15 team. So we'll look at their second half schedule. They avoid the top teams in the Coastal, so that's good for them. They do travel to Virginia Tech. I think they'll win that game. I think Virginia Tech is kind of a middling team this year. Then I think they have Wake Forest. They're going to beat Wake. They're going to go beat NC State on the road. Then they end with Florida State, Boston College, and South Carolina at home, and I think they're going to win all 3 of those. So I think they'll have a year where they'll beat Syracuse, Florida State, and Boston College. And historically in the Atlantic, you beat those 3 teams, you win the division. So we'll see if that loss to Louisville at the beginning of the season costs them a chance at the end of the first half, cost them a chance at the division. So I think they finished 6-0 over the last half of the season and go 10-2 on the season, which 10-win season is never anything to be upset about or to slouch at. So it's may not get them into playoff, but it's definitely a good season for them. So Duke, another surprise team. I guess surprise isn't exactly a good word. I think most people saw Duke taking a step forward. So I think 5-1 is not necessarily anything absurd. So let's look at their first half. They went on the road, beat by BYU, edged by Western Michigan at home. That was kind of closer win than I was expecting for someone like Duke. It went on to at Tulane, beat them, beat Florida State, which at the time Florida State was, I think, 21st overall. So that was, at the time, a really good win. That really started Florida State's slide, though. Had UNLV at home, beat them, and then they went on the road to Virginia, got beat by 3 scores, and I think kind of showed that there was a bit of a divide between Duke and Virginia still. Virginia is 7-0 all time against Duke. So that's just one of the teams that Duke just cannot beat. I think that'll change in a couple of years. Coach Darman has put together too good of a team for them to consistently lose to teams like Virginia and Pittsburgh. So lost this year, I think 2 years, maybe even next year, we'll see a Duke win over Virginia for the first time. So they're 5-1. They're not ranked currently, but they're just on the outside. I think they're still getting votes. So this is Duke's year to get a bowl game. There's no doubt about it in my mind. I think if they get only 8 wins on the rest for the season total, I think that would be a disappointing season from now. I think they'll do better than 8 wins, and I'll talk about that in a second. So, key players. Bryce Thompson, obviously. He and Kyle Jefferson came in at the same time. Bryce Thompson was redshirted. Kyle Jefferson played. Kyle Jefferson played kind of mediocre. And then Bryce Thompson came out and just surprised everyone in the spring game, and Coach Darman said, you know what? I think right now Bryce Thompson is a better player. I think he gives us the best chance to win. So he gave Bryce Thompson the start. And he's done well. I mean, he's played like a freshman at times, and he's a little too turnover happy, and he's not exactly efficient running the ball. But what he is very good at is completing passes to his teammates for the most part and scoring in the red zone. So he's got 15 touchdowns on the season to 4 turnovers. So 4 interceptions for a freshman through 6 games really isn't that bad. So I think there's a lot of positives to take out of what he's done this year. And I think Coach Darman has to be very happy that he made the switch from Kyle Jefferson to Bryce Thompson. And then he nailed the elder statesman, wide receiver Sean Spacek. He seems like he's been there forever. He's been Bryce Thompson's #1 target. I think his veteran presence kind of helped Bryce Thompson's at times just kind of get over a turnover, get over a bad series, and just get, hey, find me. I'll get open. I'll get some space. Let's just move the ball. I think they have a really good connection so far, and I'd like to see how that develops through the second half of the season. And speaking of elder statesmen, inside linebacker Ahmed Mark is, doing his thing. He's getting after the quarterback. He's creating turnovers. He's stopping the run. Having him in the middle of a defense is, especially for Duke, has been essential the last 3 years. He just consistently leads them on the field from, just how he approaches the game. I think he's just a very good player. I think Duke has been benefited so much from his presence. Now looking at positives, again, about Thompson, looks good. He looks the part of quarterback. He looks like he could develop into a really, really good player in a couple of years. So I think Coach Darman has to be very happy about that. And then, best start in school history, 5-1. I don't think Duke has ever had a 6-game stretch anywhere near this good. So they have to be very happy about that so far. Negatives, I would say running back Christian Collins, who's, I think, a redshirt sophomore who started last year. He could be better. He could do better. He just hasn't. He could help his quarterback a little more. He's not getting the ball consistently. He's just not efficient running the ball. He just isn't. He could be better. I think if he gets better and helps create a real rushing attack from both the running back and the quarterback, I think things start to open up for this team offensively. I think the only other negative I could look at is that they're not undefeated. They ran into a good Virginia team and they lost. So yeah, not much to negatives to take away from this team so far, really. So let's look at their second half schedule. They start at home against Miami, Florida. They'll win that game. At home against Pittsburgh, I think they lose that game. I think Pittsburgh takes out a lot of anchor on Duke. Then they go to Wake Forest, who I think they beat. Then they go to Virginia Tech, who I think they beat. They host Georgia Tech, who I think they beat. And I think they beat North Carolina. I think it would be the first time that they would beat North Carolina too. So I think they finished 5-1 over the second half of the season, finished 10-2. So I think we're going to have a 10-win Duke team this year. I want you all to process that right now. A 10-win Duke team is phenomenal. I think it'd be a real testament to everything Coach Darman has done and for them. Be a huge season for them. They were not going to get into the playoffs. They're definitely not making the playoffs. But I think they finished 10-2. They finished with wins over Virginia Tech and North Carolina at the end of the season. I think that gets them 18th, 18-22 ranking. And if they win their bowl game, even if they lose the bowl game, they can still finish ranked then. So I think Duke's looking down the barrel of finishing the season ranked for the first time, which is crazy. Next, we have I'm not sure what's really wrong with this team, to be honest with you. So let's look at their schedule. They had Wyoming in neutral field, and they crushed them. UMass at home destroyed them, and then it all fell apart. They lost to Syracuse on the road at Duke, at home to Mississippi State again. Mississippi State's a really good team. Then at Boston College, it was a bit of a surprise loss for them. I thought they were going to win that, get back to 500, and say, hey, let's just get it together. I'm not really sure 100% what's wrong with this team. And I'll get into some of the negatives, but something's not right. Something just isn't clicking. So key players, Benjamin Schuler has been around for as long as Max Laws and Mateo Rook. They were all recruited the same year. They've all started the same year. So there's a real way to kind of compare them. And Benjamin Schuler has probably been the best over the first 3 seasons for sure. And he needs to stop throwing interceptions. And I know he throws a lot of passes. He throws a lot of passes. They throw a ton. But he oftentimes will, I think, panic a little bit here and there and throw up a bad ball that will get picked off. At times it feels like he's keying in on Luke Cobb too much, trying to force it to Cobb. And typically Cobb, that's not necessarily a bad play to make, but every once in a while he just needs to step back and say, hey, there's other guys on this team. There's Nicholas Singer. He's been around a while. I can connect with him. We got tight end I can throw to. He sometimes doesn't always find those secondary guys. Then, key player, Florida State, Luke Cobb. I don't need to say anything about Luke Cobb. He's probably the best receiver in the country right now. And then on defense, DeQuell Moore. I think he's a junior. Probably is going to declare early. He's probably the most senior person on that defense right now. And playing in the back, he kind of sees the whole field. So he can kind of rearrange the team as if like a center fielder, almost like kind of guy who can kind of look at the field from the wide angle and say, hey, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that. And he's done that pretty good so far. I think he needs to maybe be a little more of a leader, maybe a stronger leader second half of the season. Positives, Luke Cobb is a Heisman candidate. I think he's probably a top 5 guy right now in the Heisman race. The other positive, they might set passing records. I don't know how much of a consolation that would be at the end of the season if those passing records don't turn into wins, but that's something they could do. Negative so far, 2-4 for Florida State is not good. Not good at all. They have virtually no running game. They've tried 2 different running backs, and both have been awful. I think they're both getting less than 3 yards to carry. It's bad. So far, like I said at the beginning, top of the show, they're 0-3 in the conference. The worst record in the conference so far. It's insane that Florida State is this bad. As the only team in the conference to not win a conference game is Florida State. I just can't. That's just hard to just say out loud. So we'll look at the second half. I think they'll have a little bit more luck going forward. So I think they lose to Louisville at home. I've got them beating Florida. I think that would be a pretty big upset. I think that would really give them a lot of momentum going to the last 4 games there. I think they'll beat NC State. I think they'll lose to Clemson. I think they'll beat Wake Forest. I think they'll beat the in-state rival Miami, Florida. And I think they'll finish 4-2 over the second half, finish 6-6 overall. I think a 6-6 Florida State team would still probably get a bowl game. So we'll just see how it pans out with my projections and for the final standings, where they'd be at. Oh, I'm getting news that NC State has also not won a conference game, but they have less conference losses. Coach Imposter, I know that's you. So, I mean, that's something to take away, that they have 1 less conference loss than Florida State, right? So we'll move on to Georgia Tech. Like I said, Coach Dre has left. That leaves kind of a big hole. I mean, he hasn't really been around too much the last couple, 2 or 3 years, but for about 3 or 4 seasons, he was a huge voice in the conference. He was a big presence. So for him to finally be officially gone is kind of leaves a little bit of a hole in the conference for sure. So they got their season off to a good start. They beat Georgia State, but then they lost at Bama, lost at Clemson, lost at home against North Carolina, beat Wake Forest because Wake Forest is not good. But then they lost on the road to Miami, gave Miami their only win of the season. And that, I think, came right before Coach Trey left. I think that might have been the final nail in the coffin where he said, you know what, this is not working out for me anymore. I think I need to step back. So, they went 2-4 the first half. Just not good. Just not good. Key players, the Beckett and Swanson connection, the touchdown guys, they're having solid seasons. Beckett could be better. But, I mean, they don't have anything else going for their offense. It's those two guys, basically. And then, Josh Fenton, I think, has like 4 or 5 sacks or something stupid. The Georgia Tech defensive line, there's no elite guys, but they just consistently work well together, and they get after the quarterback. I think they have 10 sacks or so through the first 6 games. So, yeah, it's just outside of that, though, the defense isn't great on a individual basis. Positives, again, the Beckett Swanson connection. I think those guys are going to have end their careers with some really gaudy numbers and maybe set some records in the ACC for quarterback to wide receiver, passing numbers. And I was looking at some stats the other day, and I noticed that Georgia Tech's pass defense is good. It's good. They're giving up 53% completion. They've given up less than 300 yards a game. They've allowed 8 touchdowns, but forced 6 interceptions. They've done really well. I'm really surprised at that. I think part of that might be Georgia State as a running team. Alabama doesn't have great quarterback play. Jamel Armstrong has struggled at Clemson. And Wake Forest and Miami have 2 of the bottom 3 quarterbacks in the conference. So they've really only played 1 quarterback in Max Laws that might have had a good game against them. So that might be part of it. So negatives. Absolutely no running game for the second straight year. I think their current running back, I forgot his name, is worse than the running back last year, and the running back last year was bad. Was awful. Part of that is, well, not part of it, but due to that, partially is that they can't score consistently. They just have struggle. They Swanson and Beckett can get up down the field all day long. They just can't get in the end zone. They just can't get that last stretch there. Too many turnovers. They're turning the ball over too much. Beckett's throwing too many interceptions. So their defense was already not great. I mean, the pass defense is somehow playing well. But they don't get real rest sometimes. They're on the field a little too much. So rest of the season's not looking well. They start at Virginia. I think they're going to lose. They lose at home against Virginia Tech, Auburn, and Pittsburgh. I don't think any of those 4 games are close, really. They lose at Duke, and they lose at home at Georgia. So they have a really tough schedule to finish the year out. And I think they lose every single game. I think they finish 0-6 and 2-10 overall. And basically you have to hit the reset button with a new coach. So we move on now to Louisville, that I think is the surprise team so far. They had the first game of the season. They lost on the road to Illinois. That was not a really good game for them. They just didn't look good. But then, they had Georgia State. Georgia State's not a very good team, but they still have some good players. They beat them. They went to UAB, beat them. I think they started getting the confidence saying, I know we're not playing great teams, but, we're playing well. We can translate this to the conference. They beat Boston College at home. They beat Clemson at home. Those are 2 good wins for a program like Louisville, even though Boston College is on a down year and Clemson maybe isn't playing to their typical standard. Those are still 2 really good wins for a team like Louisville. And then they beat Kentucky, their in-state rival, and that's a bitter rivalry. It's not widely respected for the rest of the country to look at, but I think in that state, that's a huge game. That might be one of the biggest games in the state for them. So that's always a good win when they can beat Kentucky. Okay. So 5-1, on top of the Atlantic Division, in position to win the division and go to the conference championship game. Something Louisville's never done. And honestly, I did not see them even being in this position right now. I thought at best they'd be 3-3, honestly. So, to be 5-1 is huge for them. So part of that success is Deshaun Dockery. And I say part, I mean about 75% of that success. He's got over 800 rushing yards in 6 games. He's got over 5 yards to carry. He's got 11 touchdowns rushing. I don't think he has a single fumble yet. He just, again, 11 touchdowns through 6 games. That's almost twice the game he's scoring. So he is consistently moving the ball downfield and getting first down and getting the team in position to score. On defense, to end, Damian Holly's getting after the quarterback. He's interrupting running games in the backfields. He's just all over the place in that backfield, and he's a kind of guy that when you're a team going against him, you might not, look at his strengths on paper and say, oh, he's gonna crush us. But you look at the game film, he's everywhere. He's all over the place. He's going inside. He's doing stunts inside. It's crazy what he does in there. And then Beckett Ring, the inside linebacker, he's done a very good job. I think he's got like 2 interceptions, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery, something like 35 tackles. He's just leading the team from that middle spot and playing like a quarterback on the defense. So positives we can take away. First one I'm going to say is 5-1. Louisville, 5-1. 5-1. So holy fuck. And then Heisman candidate Deshaun Dockery, for sure. I think right now he might be moving out of dark horse candidate into long shot. Is that the way it works? Is it dark horse to long shot? I don't know. He's not yet a favorite, but he's between a favorite and dark horse. So he's in that middle between everywhere. If he puts together a solid second half, he can move up into that favorite position. And they beat Clemson. That's not anything to slouch at. Clemson is still a very good team with a very good coach. So that's a huge win for a program like Louisville. Negatives, Aiden Steele is still their quarterback. He's just not good. He's just not good. He doesn't do anything well. Even, the one thing that maybe he should be able to do well and kind of lead this team with is his ability to run out of the pocket. He's not even really good at that. But despite him, they're still winning games. So whatever they're doing is working. So we look at the second half of the schedule, and it doesn't look that bad, guys. So they go at Florida State. I think they'll win that. I think they'll use their running game to kind of control the ball, and I think they'll force a couple turnovers late and seal the deal. They travel to North Carolina. I think they'll win. At home against Q's, they win. At NC State and Wake Forest, I think they'll win both those games. And then they host Virginia to end their season, and I think they will lose that game. So I think they go 5-1 the second half of the season and finish 10-2. I don't think Louisville's ever finished with 10 wins. I think the first season or two is one of the best seasons, and I don't think they finished better than 9-3 and 9-4. So this might be the best season in school history if they finish this way. And then, Miami. Okay, let's look at their schedule first. At Minnesota, really tough place to play. Minnesota's been a very good team for a long time. They lost that. They hosted the other Miami, the Miami of Ohio. They lost that game. A Power 5 ACC team hosting a MAC team should not lose. They just shouldn't. And they did. Then they traveled to UCF. A little bit better of a loss, I guess, because it was on the road. But that's still a little brother school just whomping on Miami. Hosted Virginia, they got crushed. Went to North Carolina, got crushed. And then they somehow, I don't really know what it happened. Key players, if you can count them that. Running back Ronnie Peterson's not even having a really good season, but he's the only thing in offense that I kind of like a little bit. Their quarterback, Aiden Benton, has been the worst quarterback in the conference and quite possibly the worst quarterback in the country. But Ronnie Peterson's the only guy who's really doing anything that I kind of like. Then the defensive end pairs, Devin Taylor and Gavin Crockett. no matter what Miami's doing, they could go 0-12. They'll still get like 40 freaking sacks. I swear they always get pressure on their quarterback. They're pretty much defensive end to you. Even if the guys aren't, like Ryan Frey type guys, they're still gonna get after the quarterback. So positives. The only thing I have written down is that they beat Georgia Tech, and that's barely a positive because Georgia Tech isn't good. Negatives, I have written literally everything else. Yeah, it's just not good for them right now, guys. It's just not good. So, and it doesn't get better because they travel to Duke after the break, and they lose. They lose at home to Tech, lose on the road to Pitt, at home against Cuse and Nebraska. I think they lose both those games. End the season at Florida State. They'll lose that game. Go 0-6 in the second half and finish 1-11. Yeah, not good. Okay, NC State time. Another team that's struggling. Last year I think they were the surprise team. They went 6-6 in the regular season. I think they lost their bowl game, but they got a bowl game. They got there. Things just have not connected for them this year. They just have not. Whatever worked last year just is not working this year at all. They started at Michigan. That was a relatively close game, if I remember correctly, and then they got blown out at home by Washington State. Lost on the road to Rice. That's not exactly a terrible loss, but that's not a game that ACC team should be dropping. Lost to Cuse at home, beat Marshall at home, and then lost to Wake Forest on the road. So I thought NC State was going to beat them by a couple touchdowns, and they just couldn't get it together. Before I talk about the key players, I was doing this putting this together last night. Imposter and I were also working on ACC stats and stuff, and I don't know who I would call a key player. And so I asked him, who would you consider your key players? And this is the list he gave me. Kicker, Anthony Harris. That's the first guy he starts off with. And then outside linebacker, Stuart Patterson, and wide receiver, Felix Browning. I want to go back to kicker, Anthony Harris being your number one key player. I don't know if he did it in order, or that's just the way he initially just, my kicker is a key player. And I can ask him, really, a kicker? Really? And he told me, well, I don't win against Marshall without my kicker, who went 5 for 5, and the team won 29-17. So without Anthony Harris in that game, they're 0-6. So I guess that should count as a key player. So positives, I have that they beat Marshall, and that's I guess that's a positive because they won. But that's not really much to look at positively. Negatives, I wrote same thing with Miami. Literally everything else, nothing's working for this team. Nothing. So you look at the second half of their season, and not good, guys. I think they lose every game. First at Boston College, then at home against Clemson, then on the road at FSU, then at home against Louisville, then at Pitt, and then at home against UNC. I think they finished 0-6 in the second half and 1-11 overall. And I see that the ACC news account has said kicker lives matter. They do, but I don't think that's a good way to market your team, so that your kicker is your key player. So I think North Carolina State is just gonna have a year like that. I think before Imposter came, they were 1-11 and 0-12, and then first year 6-6, things are looking great. They pull together a solid class, and then this year everything just kind of falls apart. I don't think it's going to get back together. So another surprise team is North Carolina. Going into the season, I didn't think was going to put together 5 wins. So they're at 4 already. Got off to a really, really bad start at Texas Tech. They lost, I think, 52-3. 52-3, I think it was the score. Just not a good game. But then they put it together and beat Charlotte on the road, which isn't a big accomplishment, but a win's a win for a team like North Carolina. Then they hosted Oregon, and they won that game, which was a bit surprise to me. Went to Virginia Tech, lost that, and then went at Georgia Tech and won that game. So they are 4-2 right now, which is for a team like North Carolina. That's good, good right now. So key players, Max Laws is having a good year. He's like a top 4 quarterback in the conference somehow. Yeah, Max Laws is playing well. Their tight end, Jeremy Patterson, I think it's a 2.5 out of 2.5, but he has become one of Max Laws' favorite character, but not character, but target. So he's having a really good season. And then defensive end Josiah Harden, of course, is one of the top prospects in the upcoming draft. So he's always going to be a big part of the game. So positives, I have Max Laws and question mark because I was surprised that Max Laws can do anything good. But here he is. I mean, he's led the team to a 4-2 record. He's led the team to a chance to a bowl game. He's playing well, not great, but he's playing well. You know, tight end Jeremy Patterson, like I mentioned, is outplaying his rating. Sometimes we've always heard rating isn't everything, And a guy like Patterson has kind of proven that to the rest of the country. And then 4-2, you know, chance at a bowl game. Chance at a bowl game for North Carolina with what they've gone through the last 2 or 3 years. That'd be huge for him. Negatives, I'd say Isaiah Paco is not Logan Pruitt. He struggled for a large part of the season. With quarterback play as good as Matt Claus has been, sometimes less than stellar running game isn't the end of the world. They have a tough schedule ahead, I think. It'll be really tough for them to put together wins in a row. And then another thing that they had a wide receiver transfer from Baylor, and they didn't put him on the depth chart until like week 7 or 8. He could very well be leading their team in receiving yards, and they very well could have beat Virginia Tech with his help. That's a huge coaching blunder. And like to me, that would eliminate Carl as the coach of the year candidate just because he couldn't put a transfer on his depth chart. I mean, that's horrible. Schedule going for the rest of the season. They start out at home against Miami. And I think I mentioned that Miami is going to finish 0-6 in my projection, so they're going to win that game. They lose at Pitt. They lose at home to UVA, Louisville, Vanderbilt, and Duke in not necessarily consecutive weeks and consecutive games. And then they go and beat NC State on the road to finish the year 6-6 and go 2-4 in the second half. So strong first half, weak back half. So that'll help lead to UNC getting a 6-6 record and maybe getting themselves a bowl game there. So we go to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has had a very good season. So they start out with 4 road games, all wins. First, West Virginia. Really the only team to really contain West Virginia's offense. And then Virginia Tech, conference opponent, never a team that you need to overlook, especially on the road in Blacksburg. They're a tough team to play. At the time, number 1 Penn State beat them in, I think, double overtime. Beat Oklahoma, who's having a down year. But still, it's Oklahoma. It's Ted. It's in Norman. That's a good win. Then they played, at the time, I believe, number 17 Stanford. They beat them by a pretty good margin, 2 or 3 scores. And then they hosted Virginia and lost that game. First time Virginia has beaten Pittsburgh since 2014. Poll voters, can we talk for a second? So let's talk about Pittsburgh. Okay, so going into week 8, they were number 6. They were at home against number 8 Virginia. They lost by 4. They dropped 8 spots to 14. So I guess what you're telling teams, losing by 4 points against number 8 team means you need to drop 8 spots. I thought that was a huge overcorrection, and I think does not represent where Pittsburgh belongs. I think Pittsburgh should still be a top 10 team. But anyways, that's not technically the point of this podcast, but I did want to publicly shame the voters for what they did to Pittsburgh. So they're 5-1. They're still in position to win the division. They need Virginia to step up to kind of step over their own toes, but they're in position. So key players, we can't go without mentioning Grant McConnell and Adam Coles in offense. They've just been really good. Grant McConnell is doing everything he can. He's just passing the ball a lot. He's throwing about 38, 40 passes a game for a guy who's a scrambler. That's really good. He's also rushing the ball efficiently. He's getting something like 6 or 7 yards a carry when he does run. So he's doing a bit of everything. He's a Heisman candidate, I think, right now. Adam Coles, I think, isn't a candidate. I think he's kind of right there at the dark horse area so far. But he's put together a really solid season. Then the other guy I have is inside linebacker Abe Rock, who's a guy I love. He's just, first of all, his name's Abe Rock, and he plays in Pittsburgh. That's just a perfect, marriage there. He's just kind of a hard-nosed, tough, physical guy in the middle of that defense. He just plays. Pittsburgh is the best place for him for his style of play, and I think it's a really good connection. And it was a really good decision on Coach Jumbo's part to go ahead and recruit him. I think Abe Rock is the embodiment of Pittsburgh football. So positives. I'm going to listing some stuff again. They beat Penn State. They beat West Virginia. They beat Oklahoma. They beat Stanford. And they've got a really good quarterback-wide receiver connection in Grant McConnell to Adam Coles. So I think there's a lot for Coach Jumbo to look at and say, we've done good things. The loss of Virginia stings, but negatives, no running game. Jaden Daniel is just not doing it. He just can't do it. If they had a guy like even this year, like Rodrigo Rogers in the backfield, this team's undefeated. They beat Virginia. They're probably a top 4 team right now, top 3 team. So I think the running game was what undid them against Virginia. And like I said, they might have already lost the division. Lose Virginia in the first half is, a team like Virginia this year could go run the table. So they might have lost the division already. Because even if Virginia drops a game, they still own the tiebreaker over Pittsburgh. So yeah, that stinks. Look at the second half. I think they're going to have a lot of positives to look forward to. They got North Carolina at home. They'll win. I think they'll beat Duke on the road, Miami at home, Georgia Tech on the road, NC State at home, Syracuse on the road. I think they'll finish 6-0 down the stretch and go 11-1 in the season. And I think this Pittsburgh team, they finished 11-1. Even if they don't win the division, I think they should still get in the playoffs. I think they will. So yeah, Pittsburgh, again, it's Pittsburgh. They're a very good team. Coach Jumbo is, again, a candidate for Coach of the Year. So it's Pitt. Then we go to Syracuse. As I mentioned before, they just stick around. Even with no consistency in their coaching position, they just stick around. So they beat Kentucky on the road. They lost to Purdue at home. And then they beat Florida State and NC State on the road. And then lost to Clemson at home. And then went to Maryland and got beat. So 3-3, nothing to be too ashamed of. Maryland might be a game that they might look back and say, oh, we really should have had that one. But 3-3 in position to go to a bowl game, I think they'd be happy so far. Key player, Christian Coates. He's not Dylan Bishop, but he's trying his best to be Dylan Bishop. He's Dylan Bishop light. So he's had a fairly good season. And then their secondary, Bradley Nunn, the cornerback, and Noah Tubbs, the strong safety. They're just good guys, good players. They're going to help lead the defense and get stops. I think positives that you need to look at is they beat Clemson, they beat Florida State. They're in good position to make a bowl game, and they have a good quarterback leading them who could help get them to that 6 or 7 win mark this year. Negatives, I would say they have a fairly tough schedule ahead. I think it'll be tough to put 2 wins together for them. I think consistency has been an issue. Coach has been good, but he's not consistently very good. He just kind of goes back and forth a little too much for my liking. So I think if they can get a little more consistent in the second half of the season, I think they'll put together a couple more wins than they should. So look at the second half of the season. They start at home against Notre Dame. I think they'll lose. They'll lose to BC. They'll lose on the road to Louisville. They'll beat Miami. They'll lose to Pitt, and they'll beat Wake Forest. So I think they go 2-4 and finish 5-7. Really tough for a pill to swallow for Syracuse. I think that Maryland loss will come back in the season and say, we beat Maryland, we're in a bowl game. I think that'll be the hardest loss for them this year. 5-7 projection for Syracuse, not great, but it's still Syracuse. So we'll get here to my team, Virginia, and I try to be as unbiased as possible. And guys, it's just not happening this year with this team. I'm just not going to be unbiased. I'm going to be a complete homer. So we'll look at our schedule: Old Dominion, Western Kentucky, Ball State, Miami, Florida, Duke, Pittsburgh, all wins. Duke was 21 when we beat them, and then Pittsburgh was number 6 when we beat them. So I think it's the first time in school history I've beaten more than one ranked team in a year. I don't know that for a fact, but that might be true. Might be. So we look at key players. Mateo Rook and Cameron Beatty, an offensive quarterback, wide receiver. This is their 4th year. And I'm going to throw tight end Jonathan Greer in there. They're all 4-year starters. They've all started together. Cameron Beatty has caught like 3,450 yards of Mateo Rook's like 12,000 yards. It's insane how much of a percentage he's taken up. Jonathan Greer has like a quarter of all his touchdown passes received. So these 3 guys have really brought together the consistency and chemistry that my team has needed this year to be in this position. And without those 3 guys and what they've done together for the 4 years, my team's not 6-0. Timothy Parks has 14 tackles, 4 interceptions, and 1 return for a touchdown. He's my other key player. He has been insane for me the last 2 seasons. So, without him leading the defense and getting stops here and there on the defense, we aren't 6-0 either. So positives, I'm going to say we're undefeated. We're number 6. We beat Pittsburgh again for the first time since 2014. I think Mateo Rook at this point has cemented himself as a legit Heisman candidate. I don't know that he's in that favorites group. I think he's in that group between dark horse and favorites, but I think he's there. He's up in that echelon. Defensively, Timothy Parks, Soldier Brooks have played off each other so well. Reginald Saunders has actually given me some sort of running game. He's getting like 4.5 yards a carry. He's got like 9 touchdowns. He doesn't get a ton of carries, but he's efficient with his carries. He moves the ball, he gets first downs, he scores touchdowns. So that's added a huge dimension to my offense that I haven't really had since 2014. So I guess what I'm just realizing is to beat Pittsburgh, I need a running game. All right, Jumbo, I know your weakness now. Negatives. I think the only negative I can take away from this team so far is that we don't get enough pressure on the quarterback. Historically, we've been an above average pass rushing team. This year, I think we're well below average. I think we have 6 sacks in 6 games. So 1 sack a game, I don't think is good enough for a team that's ranked as high as I am to be getting that little amount of pressure. I don't think it bodes well for a potential playoff, but I think the rest of my defense is good enough to help make up for that. So looking at my schedule, and I'm going to tell you right now, I'm projecting my team to run the table, go undefeated. So we have Georgia Tech, North Carolina, Northern Illinois, Boston College, Louisville, Virginia Tech. I think we'll win all those games, go 6-0, finish the season 12-0. I am being a complete homer right now, I know. But this is the first time I think I can get really this excited about a team. And it's not going to happen for a while because my team, after this point, like half my team graduates. So I'm really excited about this team. I'm really happy with where we are. I again, even the lack of pass rush sometimes, I'm not even that upset about. So we get to Virginia Tech, my rival. Mixed bag so far. They beat Eastern Michigan at home, but they lost to Pitt. They lost on the road to Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State is a very, very, very good offensive team. Then they beat North Carolina and Nevada, but then they dropped Texas A&M, which was a bit of a surprise to me. I didn't think Texas A&M was that good of a team. I thought Virginia Tech would handle them, but I guess playing on the road in College Station is tough place to play. And I think Texas A&M rose to the challenge there. So I'm going to go with the key players. You're going to notice something. Cornerback Trevor McKinney, cornerback Lucas Freeman, strong safety Jonathan Norman. There's no one on offense outside of Maurice Irvin that I can point to and say they're reliable, they're stable, they're consistent. Their quarterback Ralph Westphal is not good, but their secondary is very, very good. McKinney, I think, is a true freshman, doing very, very well. Lucas Freeman is, again, a shutdown guy. Jonathan Norman, I think, was the ACC Player of the Year. I think it was All-American last year. So they have a really good secondary. So positives, good secondary. In position for a bowl game. Maurice Irvin playing well in the running game, but again, he's a fullback playing running back. So there is a limit to what he can and will do. And I think that's when the liability at quarterback, which is a negative, Westfall's a liability at quarterback, will start to cost them games. Looking forward, they've got a pretty tough schedule. And I think they have struggled at times too, getting pressure on the quarterback. And, which is having a good secondary, you don't necessarily always need pressure on the quarterback. But for a team like Virginia Tech that has the issues in offense that they do, getting pressure on the quarterback would be a huge, huge help for their team. That will help take pressure off their secondary. Even though they're a very good unit, it'll give them a break every once in a while instead of making them forcing them to make a play. Sorry. So if we look at the second half schedule, I think they lose to Clemson. I think they'll beat Georgia Tech and Miami on the road. I think they'll lose to Duke at home. I think they'll travel to Boston College and win that game. Then they'll go to Charlottesville and lose to Virginia. I think that would make the all-time series tied at 4-4. Wait, no, this is season 9, isn't it? 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. No, 8. That'll be 4-4 all time. That will give me, personally, a 4-3 record against Virginia Tech. So I would be very happy with that. So I think that final stretch will put them 3-3 in the second half, 6-6 overall. It should get them a bowl game. So then we go to Wake Forest. Wake Forest. They lost to East Carolina, but they beat North Texas, then lost to Fresno, lost to South Carolina, lost to Georgia Tech, and then beat North Carolina State. So they have 2 wins. Wake Forest has 2 wins. So you can't deny that. So they're 2-4 right now. Key players was hard to come up with. Running back Oscar Sanderson hasn't been anything special, but he's been consistent at least. He gets his yards. He gets his yard per carry. He scores some points. Defensively, Brian Hendrickson, the defensive tackle, has like 4 sacks so far. And he's the leading sack getter for defensive tackles in the conference. And then cornerback Alexander Glenn has, I think, 3 interceptions or 4 interceptions in the season. So they have a couple guys in defense that are making plays. But the rest of the defense just isn't good. So positives, 2 wins. 2 wins. Another positive, they don't have the worst quarterback play in the conference. That's Miami. I think they are second worst, but they're still not worst. Negatives, pretty much everything else is bad. Coach Kendrick decided to redshirt 4 or 5 guys who would probably be starters. And with those starters, they might have beat Georgia Tech. They might be 3-3. We'll see how it plays out for them next year. I don't know what the recruiting looks like so far this year, but it's Wake Forest, so it can't be that good. So 2 wins, and I don't think they get any more on the season. I think they'll lose at Clemson, at home to Duke, at Boston College, at home against Louisville and FSU. They'll finish their season with a loss at Syracuse to go 0-6 in the back half and finish 2-10. But they have 2 wins. You can't take that away from them. So, my projected standings. We'll go with Atlantic, and then we'll go over to the Coastal. I think, from my projections, Louisville wins the Atlantic Division at 7-1, 10-2 overall. It'd be a huge, huge, huge season for Louisville if they can continue and uphold my projections. Finishing second is Clemson. I have them also at 7-1 and 10-2. However, their one conference loss is against Louisville, so Louisville would win the division. And then I have Boston College finishing 4-4 in the conference, but 4-8 overall. So I don't. Boston College, even though they finished third in the division, will not get a bowl game. I have Syracuse at 4-4 in the conference, but 5-7 overall. I have Florida State at 3-5 in the conference, but 6-6 overall. So watch out for bowl eligible Florida State at the end of the season. Wake Forest, I have finishing 0-7. Hang on, there might be an error in my calculations here. I'll fix that right now. So Wake Forest, I have finishing, but 2-10 overall. 2 wins, guys. Can't take that away from them. North Carolina State, I have finishing 0-8 in the conference and 1-11 overall. I'm sorry, imposter, I really am, but this team just is not going to get it together. So we'll go to the Coastal, and the team I have winning the Coastal Division is the Virginia Cavaliers. I have them going 8-0 in the conference and 12-0 overall. Second, I have Pittsburgh at 7-1 conference, 11-1 overall. Duke, I have 6-2 in conference. I think that would be the first time in Duke's history that they ever had a positive winning percentage in conference in any one season. So 6-2 conference, 10-2 overall. Virginia Tech 4-4 conference, 6-6 overall. North Carolina 3-5 conference, 6-6 overall. Miami 1-7 conference, 1-11 overall. Georgia Tech 1-7 conference, 2-10 overall, and Miami gets the 6th spot in the Coastal because they beat Georgia Tech. So this gives our conference championship game to be between the Virginia Cavaliers and the Louisville Cardinals. I think Virginia wins that game on a neutral field. I think both games that Virginia and Louisville play will be very close games, as in one-score games between each game. But I do think Virginia is the better team right now and will win both games. So that would put Virginia at 9-0 and 13-0 on the season. So at that point, if Virginia is 13-0, season's end, they definitely get in the playoff 100% guaranteed. I think Pittsburgh at 11-1, if they finish 11-1, would also get in the playoff. And then we'd have Louisville, Clemson, and Duke all at 10 wins in the conference. So we're looking at potentially 5 teams in the ACC getting 10 wins. Now, we're not looking at anyone else in the conference getting more than 6, but we're getting 5 10-win teams. And I don't think that's anything that we should be afraid of or ashamed of. So we look at other teams in the conference, and only 3 other teams would be bowl eligible: Virginia Tech, North Carolina, Florida State. We're doing the bowl chairman where people are going to select the bowl game, so I don't know if the bowl tie-ins from before will still count, but I think if they did, Virginia, Pittsburgh get it in the playoff would open up a bunch of games for everyone else. So I think all 6 other teams in the conference are bowl eligible will get bowl games. So I think we could see 8 ACC teams in bowl games this year, which I think would be fantastic. That would be 58% of the teams in bowl games. So I think we're going to have a very exciting finish to the year. I think we're going to have a lot of really close games, really good games. But I do think Virginia wins the conference. If anyone who's watching, and let me see one viewer who I'm guessing is Emperor. So Emperor, if you want to ask a quick question in the shout box, I'll answer your question because you stuck through and listened to me for over an hour. And that's not easy. And if it's not an imposter, I'm sorry. I don't see any questions coming up. Okay. I'll give you 10 more seconds. Okay. No questions. thank you all for watching. If you did watch, I didn't write down when each team was talked about. I probably should have, just to give you guys a hint of when your team was being talked about, so you didn't have to keep skipping through if you didn't want to listen to me talk for an hour. But thank you who do listen. Thank you for listening, watching. ACC is a fun conference. I enjoy it. The Coastal is incredibly fun all the time. So have a great season. Everyone's had a good season so far, and good luck rest of the season.